The Orphic Vox is a very popular term in the Ammonite community. Of course, Ammon Hillman, the Greek classical scholar that makes a lot of big, bold claims about ancient history and Jesus and drugs and stuff like that. Today, we're going to talk about the Orphic Vox and its relevance to history. So we will watch a video by Ammon, respond to it, talk about what scholars actually talk about, and see how much what he said is relevant to actual history.
I am going to show you what Otto Kern discovered. Otto Kern was a German classical philologist in the early 20th century. And Otto Kern said, there is something being used in antiquity, this cult language. We'll call it the Orphic Vox.
Okay, so real quick into it, and a little bit of confusions here. So Otto Kern was a classical scholar, yes, and he did talk quite a bit about Orpheus and the literature surrounding this person. He was a very controversial figure, and we will get into that maybe just a second here. But he never identified a cult language. That wasn't something he did, and he never even used the term Orphic Vox at all, because scholars in general just don't use this word. What the scholars they don't really use this word, but this word Orphic Vox, this phrase, it actually comes from Latin. It just means voice of Orpheus. So I don't know if Ammon came up with this. It doesn't seem like he did, because the first time that I'm aware of, and other people that are at least a little bit familiar with this topic are aware of, is Elizabeth Sewell's book, The Orphic Voice, and voice is just the same for Vox, but Vox is in Latin. So I can almost guarantee that's where they got this from. But Elizabeth Sewell, she's not a scholar, and she's got a lot of odd views. We can get into that. What she does is, and this is a 1960s book, by the way. She sees Orpheus as a metaphor for the poetic imagination itself, the power of language to shape order and transform human experience. Orpheus represents the archetypal poet, and the Orphic voice is the creative, ordering, life-giving power of poetry, a voice capable of bringing harmony out of chaos. She argues that the Orphic voice is a way of seeing the world, a poetic mode that reveals deeper patterns of meaning. Sewell rejects the idea of Orphism as a secret code or esoteric code, and instead treats the Orphic voice as the poetic imagination itself, creative, ordering power expressed across Homer, Dante, Milton, modern poets, mythic narratives, symbolic literature. So I could see some similarities with how Ammon uses this. But this isn't based on any type of reality. As you can kind of tell, it's based on just like a very almost like a metaphorical view of ancient texts. Not anything like Ammon treats it, where he treats it like almost like it's inspired. Like you have text that is inspired, like Christians see the Bible, where they think that the text is speaking to them. That's not how Elizabeth sees it. But yeah, so let's keep going here.
They are hiding the mystery within the Vox. It's a language within a language. It's what the Pythagoreans call the upsilon.
All right. So it seems like, I'll be honest, like almost everything he says in this video is wrong. But he says they are hiding the mystery within the Vox, a language within a language. But the Orphic texts are mythic, they are poetic, they're ritualistic, but they're not encrypted, and they do not contain a secret code accessible to only initiates. modern scholars explicitly reject the idea of a unified Orphic voice, let alone a hidden one. And um, this is something that was very important to uh, Otto Kern, which is the scholar that he referenced. So, but so Otto Kern had a similar idea, slightly similar, but it was also very different than the way Ammon portrays this. So as I said before, there's the idea of a unified Orphic voice across all of the different Orphic texts that Otto Kern was studying. We'll get into that in a second, but he also said that it's what the Pythagoreans called the upsilon, the left-handed and the right-handed path. I have no idea where he's getting this. This seems completely made up. The Pythagorean upsilon symbol represents a moral choice, not a secret language, and it doesn't have any connection to Orphic text. So I don't know if he's just like being really metaphorical or what. But I don't know. Let's just keep going here.
The left-handed and the right-handed path. You can read any text. But if you read a text that is encrypted with the Orphic Vox, you can read a text that is only for those with ears to hear.
All right. So this is where you get into some of the more special language. So he's basically saying that, hey, if you use this, this technique that I use, then you will be able to hear that only people with ears to hear can do. You'll be special, essentially. You'll be one of the only ones who could read this, that can hear this voice. And that's very comforting, very exciting, very special for a lot of people, which is why you see a lot of people that aren't necessarily concerned with the actual scholarship behind what Ammon says, but more of how it makes people feel and giving someone a sense of identity. This phrase, only for those with ears to hear, this comes from Matthew 11:15 in Jesus's parables. Jesus, the Christian Jesus. Unlike what Ammon says, it has nothing to do with Orphism. There's next to zero evidence of that. And what's really important here is that these phrases like only for those with ears to hear, it doesn't have anything at all to do with actual arguments of whether Orphism or the Orphic Vox is a real thing. Of course, Orphism is a real thing, but it doesn't have anything to do with whether Jesus is connected to it. And what that does is it means that if you are someone that gets some type of emotional feeling, emotional high, if you get something out of believing what Ammon has to say, then your mind's just gonna go straight into believing and just totally skip the thinking part, the prefrontal cortex, the think part of the brain where you systematically think. Psychologists would say that's type 1, type 2 thinking. Technically, you don't skip the prefrontal cortex. That's a whole nother discussion. But the important thing is that it also creates an insider-outsider dynamic. So we on the inside have this special knowledge; those on the outside don't. So it gives you a sense of community as well. It primes the audience to believe that they are receiving this secret knowledge, and we haven't discussed any arguments yet. It had nothing to do with the evidence. And so let's keep going here.
Yeah, that's the expression. For those of you who have ears to hear, and that's my goal tonight, is to give you those ears to hear. And I'm going to do that very simply by just transporting us back. I'm going to show you a never before read text This thing has never been translated into English.
All right. So I'm not even sure what text he has about to say, knowing Ammon and his past experiences. When he says that there is a text that has never been translated, it's usually wrong. Now, there are certainly some texts in ancient antiquity that have not been translated, lots of texts, but it's very unlikely that Ammon's the one reading those. They typically have very little relevance. Oftentimes, it's just a little chart or a few different sentences. Jimmy gave Bob 5 shekels. 7 plus 3 equals 10 shekels. So there was 10 more shekels left over, or for in exchange for wheat, stuff like that. There was certainly other texts. I've been told that Galen does have some manuscripts or I don't know if they're manuscripts or what, some texts that are untranslated. But at the same time, if this is an actual Orphic text, which is the whole entire reason that Ammon is referencing this, that's almost certainly false. Orphic texts have been translated for over a century. Kern's fragments, Otto Kern has, they're translated. The scholar Burnaby has his own edition. The Orphic hymns have dozens of translations. So if there's any special Orphic text out there, just because of the attention that the topic has had and how interesting it is, it's very unlikely that Ammon's found some, special untranslated text that has some type of actual special significance. Otherwise, if it did have any kind of special significance, scholars would be talking about it. It's not, just for clarity there, it's not even that a text would be untranslated. It's that, one, he wouldn't even be able to access the text if some scholar didn't upload it online. Ammon's not going over and Greece and finding ancient manuscripts. Ammon is looking online, and if a text hasn't been translated yet, but it is online, it's probably because it wasn't relevant enough to be worth talking about. In other words, a scholar didn't find it as that it would, because oftentimes scholars translate things because they think that it'll further their career because it's interesting. People want to read it. But if people don't want to read it, then nobody's going to translate it, a lot of times, at least. Anyways, so let's keep chugging along.
I'll tell you how we found it, and I'll translate it for you. And you will be in a place that only you who are sitting as initiates are able to come to. Hail Satan.
Yeah, so that's some of that language there. Only you who are sitting as initiates are able to come to. So this is designed to flatter the audience, create artificial exclusivity that we're almost special because we have this exclusive knowledge, but it's totally artificial, completely made up. Yes, Ammon's group is the only people watching this, the only ones that get access to this knowledge, but I don't think it's knowledge that most people want to have just because it's not based on any type of actual historical data. It also heightens emotional receptivity and bypasses critical thinking, as we mentioned before. But what you really came for was probably not Ammon's comments. You were probably coming here because you actually want to know what the Orphic Vox is. So we talked about how there's not really an Orphic Vox other than some writings from a non-scholar, Elizabeth Sewell, that just took a very poetic view of understanding ancient history. No, it wasn't really anything like that, according to Ammon at least. But let's talk about Otto Kern, because this is the scholar that Ammon cites. This is the one that supposedly has the authority about what's backing Ammon up. So Kern, he has some actually interesting views. So Otto Kern, he argued that, and here's his book. It's a recent edition, but same book. the Orphicorum Fragmenta. And he argued that if you gather all the scattered Orphic fragments, testimonia, hymns, ritual descriptions, you can reconstruct a single coherent religious worldview, a unified Orphic theology expressing a distinct cosmology, morality, doctrine of the soul. And this kind of makes sense because, I mean, think about Christianity, okay? Someone, say a pastor, they take the Gospels and the Revelation and Paul's letters and the Old Testament, and there's a lot of similar views there. For the most part, they believe in one supreme deity, and they have specific views of salvation. They might maybe slightly contradict, or but of course, like a pastor is going to read it and think, okay, so this is all one tradition, one religion. So of course it's going to have all one same view, same morality, doctrine of the soul and cosmology, morality, stuff like that. So this is what Kern did. He thought there was a coherent Orphic cosmogony, a consistent myth of Dionysus and the soul. There was a shared ritual logic that they used for rituals, a moral impurity system, a soteriological, salvation-oriented system, a distinctive religious tendency across the centuries. So what this means is it's not just a specific set of texts, say in the 1st century or the 3rd century BCE or something. This was a ton of different texts from the 6th century all the way up to Roman era poets, Neoplatonic philosophers, all over the place, lots of different time periods. This is what he was looking at. And he believed Orphism was not just a label, but an actual religious tradition with doctrines, rituals, more teachings like a normal religion. So when he saw scattered reference to Orpheus, purity rules, soul doctrine, and Dionysian myth, he assumed they were parts of one system, not independent traditions. He treated a bunch of fragments of texts across hundreds of years as continuous doctrinal works, what he called Orphic theogony, now lost except for fragments. So he might not have said that there was originally a whole book with all these things, but what he did was that many of the works were lost, but he took just the fragments we have and kind of put them together into one set of views. Now, for Kern, Orpheus was not just a mythical poet, but a religious teacher whose name guaranteed doctrinal continuity. So any text attributed to Orpheus was treated as part of that same tradition. This reinforced the idea of a unified Orphic voice. So that's what he meant by unified Orphic voice, in the same way that Christians think that there is a unified voice in the New and the Old Testament. A very similar way, maybe not exactly the same, but very similar. So once again, Kern treated texts from the 6th century BCE, classical Athens, Hellenistic ritual specialists, Roman era poets, Neoplatonic philosophers as texts with one voice, but they all came from different centuries, different authors, different agendas. The problem is that they often contradicted each other. And the thing is that what's really fascinating to me is that he actually took some of the same approaches that Christians use today when they see what they think is a possible contradiction. And they say, okay, well, hey, we can just interpret this one part of the text differently, and therefore we can still make it so there's no contradictions. And Kern saw recurring themes like Dionysus Sigrus, I don't know how to pronounce that, the dismemberment myth, the soul's divine origin, ritual purity, vegetarianism, reincarnation, and cosmic order, along with Orpheus's name mentioned, and assumed it must all be one unified Orphic mythic religious system. And as you can guess, if you've seen any of Ammon's videos, this is extremely different than what Ammon would say. Okay, and so yes, what are the problems? So one of the problems is that ideas across time change. You can't just assume things are staying the same. So what he would do is he would take an idea in the 6th century, and then he would compare that with an idea in the 1st century and just assume that they're still talking about the same thing. And that's just not how ideas work. We see this across all religions. So ideas about Satan changed in the Old Testament. You have the idea of a Satan adversary figure. There's no red ears and pitchfork, and there's no big baddie that's against God, Yahweh. Then you have in the Second Temple period, you have this idea of a cosmic bad figure against God coming about due to Zoroastrianism. And then in the New Testament, you see that it really starts to take form where this is uh, a Satan figure that possibly, and there's a few texts, but it's not explicit everywhere, is that there is a Satan figure that seems to be in control of some other divine figures. But in the Second Temple literature, you see multiple Satans, and they have different names, and there's not one clear, consistent view of Satan across this time. So things change. And then, of course, later on, you have Milton's Paradise Lost with all the more explicit Satan figures in it, and the rest is history of what we think about Satan today. So, in other words, things change. You see this all kinds of times in history, whether it be Bible, Muslim, uh, pretty much any religion. Things are going to change just because they don't have the ability to consistently keep literature the same as it was originally. Additionally, you have some people that specifically want things to change because it'll adjust better with their religion. So with their view of things in the world and making sense of life. So then there is the question though. So if things do change, there's also the question of what Kern argued, which is that he treated these texts as Orphic, which were not Orphic at all. So many of them, of course, were, but like for example, some late Neoplatonic reinterpretations that. So you had some Neoplatonic philosophers that they took Orpheus, the previous Orpheus texts, Orphic texts, and they essentially changed those Orpheus texts to fit their agenda, their own Neoplatonic agenda. But of course, that would be like a Satanist taking, not exactly the same thing, but or maybe like a Buddhist taking Christian doctrine and or beliefs about God or the afterlife or whatever, and just shaping it into Buddhistic teachings. So that would be a very different religion than uh, what was in Christianity. So even if someone in the 1st century, the other thing is that even if someone in the 1st century thought they were part of some Orphic set of beliefs, they at that time had no way of knowing which was actually ancient and which wasn't, and therefore there was going to be a difference in shift, even if they aren't changing it on purpose. And then, as I said before, Kern would see some of these contradictions and make excuses for why they don't contradict, kind of like Christians sometimes do, but they're like Kern didn't really look at the data, and this is why almost all scholars reject Kern's view here of this idea of just an overarching kind of like a theological worldview of Orphic thought, theology. Yes, that was what Otto Kern thought. That is what he argued. If you actually want a full, detailed idea of what it was like in this time, what their views were with Orpheus, and the differing views, the differing thoughts about cosmogony and theology and moral thought, Maybe we can do a video on that sometime. But otherwise, for today, that'll be it. I don't think Ammon knows what he's talking about on this topic. Let me know if I'm wrong, and hope you guys have a good one.